Most W2 movies give you explosions and heroism, but what if I told you there are only 13 films that actually let you experience the real nightmare of what happened? Not the sanitized version. We're talking about films so brutal that critics compared them to horror movies. Films that made audiences feel war, not just watch it. These aren't the big studio blockbusters everyone knows. These are the films that destroy your soul and make you understand why survivors still have nightmares 70 years later. Stick around. In number 13, When Trumpets Fade, 1998. This HBO movie dropped in the late 90s, and absolutely nobody talked about it, which is insane because it captures the meat grinder of the Hurtgen Forest better than any theatrical release ever could. Ron Eldard plays a reluctant private thrust into command when his entire unit gets obliterated. The thing that makes this film different is that it refuses to give you heroic moments. Everything is mud, confusion, and pointlessness. The Hurtgen Forest battle was one of the most brutal and least understood battles of the entire war, with tens of thousands of casualties for almost no strategic gain. The film shows soldiers dying for nothing. That's the horror right there. It's not about winning. It's about watching young men waste away in this frozen nightmare forest with no clear objective. One viewer on Reddit perfectly summed it up. When Trumpets Fade was more realistic than Saving Private Ryan, except for the first 10 minutes of that movie. It is intense from the first minute to the last, and the acting is superb. There are no Superman heroes there, and it's truly a gut-wrenching movie about young men dying for the insanity of war. That's exactly what you get. Relentless brutality from start to finish. No glory, no patriotic speeches, just the absolute darkness of combat. Number 12, Rogue's Tavern, 1951. Here's a film that got nominated for Best Picture and then completely vanished from cinema history. Rogue's Tavern was nearly forgotten until recently, which is criminal because the concept alone is devastating. The Americans are sending German prisoners back into Nazi Germany as spies near the war's end because their regular intelligence operatives kept getting caught by the Gestapo. The film follows a young, idealistic German medic who agrees to spy against his own country. Think about that moral weight for a second. But what makes this film genuinely horrifying is that it was shot on location in Germany right after the war ended in 1951. The sets aren't fake. Bombed-out buildings are actual bombed-out buildings. Real tanks and weapons still scattered across the landscape. When viewers watched this back then, it must have felt like watching the war still happening. The production team drove through the actual devastation of Nazi Germany and filmed right there in the rubble. One viewer described it perfectly. It was very good and filmed in post-war Germany in 1951, so lots of war damage still visible. It's kind of forgotten about. That authenticity, that realness of standing in an actual destroyed country, gives this film a weight that modern productions can't replicate. On number 11, Jack the Killer, 2017. This German film is absolutely wild, and barely anyone knows it exists. A young German deserter finds an officer's uniform lying around, puts it on, and suddenly people start treating him like he has authority. But instead of running, he leans into it. He becomes a captain in his mind and starts recruiting other deserters and criminals, going on a murderous rampage. The crazy part is that it's based on a real incident. This kid was only 21 years old when he was later charged with war crimes. What makes this film so visceral is that it shows how completely chaotic Germany was toward the very end of the war. You barely hear about German desertion, but it happened constantly. Soldiers were running, officers were abandoning posts. It was pure anarchy, and this film captures that descent into madness perfectly. One viewer called it simple but devastating. The Captain is the most visceral movie I've ever seen. It's exactly right. The film shows you how fast morality collapses when someone with zero legitimate power suddenly gets a uniform, how quickly humans turn monstrous, how the system itself creates murderers. Number 10, The Unknown Soldier, 1955. This Finnish war film is 3 brutal hours of a machine gun company deployed in 1941 during Finland's fight against the Soviet Union. They cross the border into brutal guerrilla warfare territory, and the film absolutely refuses to glamorize any of it. Just grim reality, loss, tragedy on both sides. Soldiers stepping over the bodies of friends they just watched die. The camera doesn't look away. The Unknown Soldier feels completely different from most war films because Finland's perspective was never really told in Hollywood productions. You get raw, realistic, painful moments of combat with zero sentimentality. One viewer called it their absolute favorite. The Unknown Soldier is my favorite World War II film of all time. It is absolutely a top 5 of the genre. That's the impact this film has. It's not famous in America. It's not English language, but it captures the essence of what war actually does to human beings better than almost anything else ever made. Number 9. Salerno Beachhead, 1945. This 1945 film is unique in the way it approaches combat. American soldiers land on the beaches near Salerno, Italy, and have to move inland to capture a farmhouse 6 miles away. But here's the thing that separates it from every other war film. Almost all the actual battles happen off camera. You don't see the traditional action sequences you expect. Instead, you hear the fighting. You feel the tension of waiting and moving forward. The characters talk about combat experiences they have off screen. It's deliberately paced. It slows, it speeds up, it creates this suffocating sense of actually being there in combat, where most of your time is just fear and anticipation. One viewer nailed why this matters. It's a good look at a forgotten theater of the war. That's the genius here. While everyone focuses on D-Day and Europe, this film captures an entirely different hell in a completely different way. By refusing to show you traditional action, it forces you to imagine the horror. Your brain fills in the blanks, and that's somehow worse. Number 8. The Train, 1964. Directed by John Frankenheimer, this film is about the French resistance desperately trying to stop Nazis from stealing priceless artwork during the final days of WWII. Burt Lancaster originally wasn't happy with the director they hired, so he fired him after a few days and brought in Frankenheimer. What Frankenheimer created was absolutely insane. No miniatures, no fake explosions. All the train crashes you see are real trains with real explosives creating actual wreckage. People got hurt. Frankenheimer later admitted it was pure luck nobody actually died during production. They literally shot this movie in France in locations still dangerous from leftover World War II ammunition buried in the ground. The final train crash was so massive and dangerous that it required weeks of planning, filming a real train crash in a war-torn country where hidden explosives could detonate at any moment. That's the kind of commitment to realism that makes this film genuinely horrifying. One viewer summed it up: sterling performances and great practical effects. Exactly right. Still impressive today. The danger was real. The explosions were real. The potential for tragedy was real. Number 7. Eternal Zero, 2013. This Japanese film tells the story of siblings in modern-day Japan learning about their grandfather who was a kamikaze pilot in WWII. They reach out to his old comrades, but everyone gives different accounts of who he really was and how he ended up flying those suicide missions. When this film came out, legendary director Hayao Miyazaki actually criticized it, calling it a pack of lies. Probably because Miyazaki had just made his own film about the same plane. But the real reason this film didn't get attention in the West is because it tries to show the kamikaze pilot sympathetically, which obviously stirred up massive controversy. People didn't want a sympathetic look at Japanese soldiers. They wanted villains. But that's exactly why this film matters. It's genuinely anti-war, emotionally devastating, and asks uncomfortable questions about sacrifice and indoctrination. One viewer perfectly described its value. Although it is a fictional story, it is very authentic when it comes right down to it. Foreign-made historical period films are far more authentic than those made in Hollywood. That's exactly right. This film doesn't excuse anything. It shows how young men were brainwashed into believing death was honor. Number 6. Dunkirk Beach, 1958. Way before Christopher Nolan made his version, there was this film starring John Mills about British soldiers stranded behind enemy lines in France, desperately trying to reach Dunkirk for rescue. Meanwhile, back in Britain, civilians like newspaper reporter Charles Foreman are doing everything they can to help, even taking their own boats across the channel. Producer Michael Balkin said it was the biggest film he'd ever made at that time in terms of sheer scale. It became the second highest grossing film in Britain in 1958. 1958. What makes this film special is how it connects the soldiers on the ground with the people back home trying to save them. The two storylines finally come together at the end in this way that feels surprisingly emotional. One viewer described it perfectly. "This is one of the best war movies." And they're absolutely right. It's not famous today, it's not constantly referenced, but the way it builds dread and handles the desperation of evacuation is genuinely powerful. It shows ordinary people making extraordinary sacrifices. Number 5, Rats of Tobruk, 1944. This is a lesser-known Australian WWII film about 3 men fighting against Rommel's forces in North Africa. Yeah, it's dated. Yeah, the dialogue is stiff. Yeah, there's an unnecessary romance subplot early on. But once the story moves to North Africa, everything changes. Documentary-style battles, intense action, gritty realism that feels authentic because most of the actors were literally serving soldiers on leave from actual duty. Many of them were on break from combat to film this. It's not Gallipoli, the famous Australian war film, but it gets the job done. It's a film about heroic men holding on under the most adverse circumstances imaginable. What's remarkable is that it was made during the war itself, while the actual fighting was still happening. That's not just filmmaking, that's documentation of something actively occurring. But number 4, The Thin Red Line, 1998. Terrence Malick returned to Hollywood after a 20-year absence to create this absolutely devastating meditation on the Battle of Guadalcanal. This isn't a traditional war film. This is philosophical. This is poetic. This is a film that questions whether war even exists or if we just imagine it into being. The opening shows soldiers AWOL, living idyllic lives on a Pacific island before they get captured and thrown back into combat. That contrast between beauty and violence is what destroys you. With an insane ensemble cast including Sean Penn, Jim Caviezel, Nick Nolte, George Clooney, John Travolta, and Woody Harrelson, every scene feels like a conversation with the camera about the nature of existence itself. Critics have called it brutally honest about how war dehumanizes soldiers, how it strips away everything that makes you human. Rolling Stone wrote, "The film offers raw fear, combat numbness, and moral uncertainty, plus assurances that war dehumanizes the men it doesn't kill." That's exactly what Malick does. He forces you to contemplate whether any of it matters, whether any of it means anything. Number 3, Das Boot, 1981. Originally made as a 5-hour miniseries for German TV, then cut down for worldwide release, finally expanded again to a 210-minute director's cut, Wolfgang Petersen's Das Boot remains the most claustrophobic war film ever made. This is a masterclass in tight space storytelling. You're trapped inside a German U-boat with a crew drowning in tension. The pressure piles up until you feel like the submarine itself is crushing you. The infamous sequence where the captain pushes the sub to life-threatening depths is still almost unwatchable. It's so intense you physically feel the danger. Das Boot doesn't show you heroic submarine warfare. It shows you men trapped in a metal tube, breathing recycled air, terrified every single moment. The film captures the absolute psychological breaking point of extended combat in the most confined possible space. One critic wrote, "The film is a masterclass in economical tight space storytelling, piling the pressure on both characters and audience until the sprockets squeak." Number 2, Schindler's List, 1993. Steven Spielberg's masterpiece follows Oskar Schindler, a German industrialist who saved over 1,000 Jewish people from being transported to concentration camps. The film is 3 hours long and shot almost entirely in black and white. It's impossibly hard to watch. Ralph Fiennes plays Eamon Goeth, the commandant of the concentration camp, and his performance is so disturbing and so authentic that it destroys you. Liam Neeson plays Schindler, a man who starts as an opportunist profiting from the war and gradually transforms into someone who realizes the only thing that matters is saving lives. Spielberg refuses to look away from the atrocities. He forces you to see what happened. Every frame is a document of evil. When Schindler breaks down near the end, realizing he could have saved more people, it's one of the most devastating moments in cinema history. The film changed how Hollywood portrays the Holocaust. Before Schindler's List, studios were afraid to show the true horror. After this film, that kind of unflinching realism became necessary. Number 1. Come and See, 1985. Elim Klimov's Come and See is the most graphic and haunting anti-war film ever made. It's not just a war movie, it's a descent into absolute madness. The film follows Floria, a teenage boy in Belarus who joins the resistance against Nazi occupation. But the more you watch, the more the film strips away his humanity. He starts as an optimistic kid. By the end, he looks like a corpse. Gray hair, haunted eyes, the wrinkles of a man 4 times his age. The transformation is so complete that rumors circulated that actor Alexei Kravchenko's hair actually turned gray during filming. He was put on a starvation diet for the latter parts of production and actually became skeletal. Before the most violent scenes, Klimov had a psychotherapist hypnotize the young actor to protect his mental health because he was worried the genuine horrors being filmed could permanently damage the kid's mind. Come and See doesn't hold back. You see mass executions. You see villages burned to the ground. You see an SS unit round up an entire village, threatening to burn alive all the children if the parents don't leave them behind. This actually happened. Over 628 Belarusian villages were burned during the war. The film forces you to witness it through a child's eyes. Every atrocity is worse because we're experiencing it through someone innocent. There's one sequence where you watch the Nazis force Chinese men into the ground alive and tamp the earth down on top of them. It's not presented as action. It's presented as pure documentation of evil. One film critic wrote, "Come and See doesn't just show war. It makes you feel its horror in your bones long after it ends." That's exactly right. This film stays with you. It haunts you. It ruins your sleep. It forces you to reckon with what humans are capable of doing to each other. It's the only film on this entire list that truly captures the absolute terror and devastation of WWII without any filter, any glamorization, any heroic narrative to hide behind. These 13 films don't ask you to enjoy war. They make war absolutely unbearable to watch. They strip away the heroics and force you to see combat as the horror that it actually is. So here's my question for you in the comments. Have you actually watched any of these? And more importantly, do you think modern audiences can even handle this level of unflinching brutality anymore? Or have we become so desensitized to violence that we actually need these brutal depictions to feel anything at all? Drop your thoughts below and let's have a real conversation about what these films mean.